want to start with talking about what they should have, what we think should be offered in school,
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start.
and then go into the one that we all know the most about?
Yes.
Sweet.
All right.
Oh, nice. We've got a little stopwatch on here as well, so that's convenient.
Perfect. All right, I'm Rachel,
I'm Evan.
I'm Jay.
and we're going to start by talking about the There Are Other Children Here article and our thoughts on what we think should be offered in the schools. While I was reading this, I was pretty conflicted. I think that there should definitely be an option, and I think that incorporating the Native Studies into your social studies course is a good thing, but I also see how they think that there won't be enough focus on it. And especially as being from, I don't know if everyone's from BC,
Yeah.
being from here, there's a lot of First Nations communities. So I think that there does need to be a bit of a focus, and it would be good for us to know the history of basically our community.
Yeah, I grew up in Ontario, and it was kind of in the country, and there wasn't a whole, like, there weren't any reservations close, but I mean, close is all relative. There were definitely some around that we kind of knew about a little bit. So, I remember in my social sciences classes learning about First Nations and stuff. It only went as far as back when the Europeans came and the conflict there, and the treaties with the French or the treaties with the English and all that jazz, and the fur trade and stuff, and I had all that in French, so what I remember and what I knew at the time is pretty minimal. So yeah, it's definitely interesting stuff.
When I was growing up, the first 10 years of school, I went to private school, and during that time, I found we did a lot more school based around Aboriginals, and we would have many of them come in from all over the island throughout the years, and we'd have different ceremonies and traditions and such we would do with them. I went to GNS. It's right on the water.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of canoeing, and
Nice, that'd be cool.
yeah, it was really cool actually. And we would go to this place called Jimmy Chicken Island. It was just across the way. And one time, I think it was in grade 7, we did a clam bake over there, and that was probably pretty cool. I'd never done that before. But I found when I went over to Spectrum in grade 10, it kind of completely changed. They didn't really focus on anything Aboriginal, especially, and they just had like a very basic grade 10 curriculum. And I think grade 11 they offered First Nation studies, but it was never mandatory. And I think in both my high school years there, the class got canceled because not enough people were even interested in it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a common problem why they want it to be mandatory. Because I know, well, we had one. I went to Stellies, so we're basically right beside a reservation, and I part of the thing, the multiculturalism I agree with is that it's basically they want you to talk about the food and the dances, and that's their culture, which is basically what we were presented with when I was in middle school and elementary school, and then in high school there was an Aboriginal Studies course, and I know that it definitely had a class for one of the years I was there, because I remember people taking it instead of socials as a graduating requirement, but that's all I really heard about it. So I guess maybe if it is offered, there needs to be more awareness.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, not going to high school in BC or whatever, I definitely, living here and going to UVic, I see a lot more Natives and First Nations people around than I did growing up, and I think it's definitely important that there are options available, but not just kind of options, that are getting dusty on the shelf. Options that are being promoted and being encouraged for people to take. I remember back in high school, like, we had a kinesiology class that was offered, and word spread pretty quick about that because it was with one of the PE teachers that everyone loved, and all the student athletes would take that class and talk about how awesome it was. Alrighty, let's try this again. Cut and paste these videos together, and let's hope this happens. So yeah, just finishing off that thought about the kinesiology, and kind of drawing a parallel to Native studies. I think if we have teachers that are engaged and enthusiastic in promoting that class to the students, and maybe getting a couple students hooked where they're like, hey, this class was sweet, or this teacher is sweet. I think if you can get the students to really love going to your class, even if it's not necessarily a native studies class, but maybe a PE class or a socials class, they'll be more inclined to be like, oh, I want to take a class with, what are you teaching next term, sir? And they'll be more excited for that. And I think that could be a good way to kind of open Pandora's box a little bit of just having this knowledge spread.
Yeah, bringing people in, getting them excited.
Yeah, and I think that's the first step, because I think a lot of us are pretty ignorant. I've
Yeah.
realized that I'm pretty ignorant to a lot of these issues, and I can blame it on whatever I want. Not being from BC or whatever, but it's not like BC is the only place that has First Nations.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where I think if we can get that ball rolling, I think it will pick up momentum, as long as as a teacher, we're excited about it and make the class interesting, and something that students are going to want to take.
Yeah. I think another way of bringing in interest is when you're teaching these, whether it's in Aboriginal studies or social studies, is kind of bringing the two together and being more localized. So if you're doing an Aboriginal studies, my school is right next to a reserve, so maybe learning about what is in your community. Maybe people are afraid to take them because, oh, I don't want to learn about what happened 100 years ago, or I don't want to learn about what happened on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
But if you kind of bring it home and say, well, this is what's happening now, and this is what's happening in your community, and that way they might be a little more inclined to be like, well, I live here, so I might as well know about what's going on here, and get people a little more involved that way.
Yeah, I think the relatability issue is huge for it. If someone can relate to something just like anything else in school, it sticks with them a lot easier. I think if we look at the saltwater people article here, it's completely applicable to anybody that grew up on the island, especially like myself. I do a lot of fishing and crabbing, anything that really gets me out on the water, and this article just really brought that home for me. And I found it really interesting with all the seasons change and how they would go after different fish at different times, and just the abundance of seafood that they were able to bring in on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Another thing I really enjoyed about that article is them talking about the sustainability, how they would only take the resources they need, and how they would save it. So when it wasn't in season, they dried it and they had everything available to them all year round. So that they would be set. One thing I really enjoyed about that article was how they talk about the eggs, how says they wouldn't take the only egg and they wouldn't take it from the nest that has 4 in it, because the mother could already be sitting on it. So I really like that they were considering not just themselves, but they were considering the nature and the earth that they're taking from, and so it was kind of a give back thing. They wouldn't take it if it was only 1 egg, because that was the bird's only egg. So, and they would take it if there was 2, because that way they might lay another one. So I just really enjoyed how I think that it needs to be less of an Aboriginal culture and needs to be more of a world culture of sustainability.
Yeah, it's kind of neat how they knew not to burn the wick at both ends. They knew we need to get some food now, but we need to make sure that next year and the next year and the next year that's still going to be available. And having that foresight and having that knowledge to be mindful of that is definitely something that is lacking big time in today's society, and a huge just cultural takeaway that we can use and try to spread that, just to make everything that much better moving forward. So
Yeah, I like how they're able to use really every part of everything. Like they really respect the animals and fish that they're taking, and they give them like an honorable death. And when if they take the seal, they're using every part of that. They're using the fat and they're making oils out of it, and using it for energy. And I also found it really interesting when they were talking about the salmon run and how there was thousands upon thousands. They said they could see them jumping out of the water, and but they only took exactly what they needed, so that the next year their kids and their kids' kids would have fish to eat as well.
Yeah. So I guess what we need to take forward is how do we as teachers want to bring it into our classrooms and And how do we get people excited about it? Do we teach a course talking about the history of it, or do we just try to bring all aspects of the Aboriginal culture into our other courses?
I think we have to do a little bit of both. You know, I think in obviously there's kind of set curriculum that we're kind of supposed to teach, supposed to get through. But at the same time, you know, we can take practices and themes and whatever and use it in a PE class or use it in a socials class or an English
Definitely.
class. And I think that's really where we can sort of maybe get the kids hooked and be like, you know, this idea that we've been talking about, it's not a Western idea, it's not a European idea, it's not a whatever, it's a First Nations concept, and maybe that can get people interested in going, well, wait, isn't there? And you're like, yeah, there's this First Nations 11 class that I teach, and they might go, okay, cool, maybe I'll give that a shot next year. And as long as we're willing to be kind of, you know, enthusiastic and engaged in that material, if we can get the students excited, instead of those classes being kind of a
Sure.
second choice, or yeah, it'll be something that they're going to want to try to fit into their schedule, and that'll just really, I think, get everything moving faster and progressing faster towards hopefully finding some sort of a solution to this problem
Definitely.
that's been around for a while.
Yeah. So before we had technical difficulties, you had a really good way of introducing the hard topics of Aboriginal studies. Do you want to talk about it again, or do you want me to?
Uh, Maybe throw a little refresher on me there.
So before we had a little bit of microphone issues, Jay's idea was to teach the kids about the culture of things, to teach them
Oh, right.
about, you know, the similarities between our culture and their culture before moving on to saying, well, now that you realize that we're similar.
Yeah, exactly. Surprising that I can't remember what I said even 10 minutes ago, right? Yeah, once we see those similarities and see, you know, that we're all just people, you know, we all do things roughly the same way in
Live
some
in the same
areas and
communities.
differently in other areas, then, you know, once we appreciate each other's culture and kind of have fun with that, we can dig into more of the nitty gritty things of being like, well, now that we all can see things from each other's perspective, let's look at this specific area and try to come up with a solution to this problem, and gain confidence from that ability to, you know, work together and see both sides of the same coin, and just kind of slowly work from there. And I think that would be a great way to just get students thinking about these issues that have just been around for way too long.
Yep, it's a good way of having a base so that they don't feel like it's us against them when we start talking about this is what happened in the past and this was a tragedy and this shouldn't have happened. So now that we know this did happen and that you know that you guys can get along today, how do we move forward?
Yeah, I think that guilt of our ancestors is something that I definitely feel. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, like I don't know, I kind of struggle with it. I know I shouldn't, because it wasn't me.
Was it? Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, I'd like to hope that if I was around in that time, I'd have acted differently.
Exactly.
But I mean,
And we can only read so much about it,
Yeah,
but realistically, there's nothing we could have done. We weren't there.
yeah,
I think the best thing to do now is just to like honor those traditions and hopefully get more people interested in the topic like we're talking about here. And like I mentioned earlier, like being in private school to start, we had a lot of that and we engaged ourselves in it. And I don't know if it's like that for public school here too in the early ages, but I feel anything that's introduced in the earlier times, you have a better chance of it sticking. And it could be something as simple as just doing some sort of native art project, maybe. Like I've always kind of gravitated towards. I've always thought like the masks and like the colors they use are really interesting. Or it could be something as simple as in like home ec, just making simple things that they would make on a daily basis that they lived off.
The bannock bread.
Yeah, or some pemmican or things that you can even adapt the recipes to like modern day, but same basis.
And even though that's going back towards what they feel is not right, the multiculturalism, how it's not going into the deep stuff, it is definitely a good start, right, to get you
Yeah.
introduced to
It's
the culture.
it's
before
hard
you
to
go
go
depth.
into the deep stuff if you don't have an understanding or appreciation
Yeah.
of, you know, I don't want to say superficial, because I think that's the wrong word.
But yeah,
but the sort of
the more the cultural celebrations as opposed to